Hey guys, it's Greg. Today we want to share with you our ranking of expansions to the Arkham Horror the card game. It was very difficult for us to make this ranking as we think that all the cycles are amazing. So don't think that being on the last place, that means that the cycle is the worst and you should skip it. No, we think that all the cycles are amazing, but some of them are better than other, and that's it. So remember that. So let me show you which of the cycles we think you should consider to purchase first if you want to start your journey, your experience with Arkham Horror, the card game.
DUNWICH Legacy is the first cycle ever released. Unfortunately, it's in the last place, but not because it's bad in any way. Next ones were simply better. DUNWICH Legacy takes place sometime later, after the events introduced in the novel The DUNWICH Horror. We get a great story, well built on the lore from the novel and spiced up by the authors. So why it is in the last place? Main scene of the cycle is just being released first. Now, from the perspective of time, DUNWICH is rather basic, not really surprising and maybe a little bit plain. If authors would make a remake with current knowledge and experience, DUNWICH Legacy could be one of the best, as the novel DUNWICH Horror is simply iconic. The latest cycle is based on one of the best novels by Lovecraft, At the Mouths of Madness. Is the first cycle complete from the beginning without mythos packs released every month, and that's a very good decision. In this cycle we can find a lot of references to the novel, like characters, locations, events. The story is placed after the events in the novel, and that strong connection with the novel is definitely a pro, especially with everyone who read it. Another very immersive element is the crew. Investigators are joined by expedition crew that should help them survive in Antarctica. As you can guess, not all of them will survive. Who survives and who doesn't can strongly influence the outcome of many events, making the game more replayable than before. And now cons. Campaign feels short and not diverse enough. Some scenarios are split into parts. The first scenario is split into 3 parts, the final scenario into 2, and one additional scenario can be played up to 3 times. Even if the goals are different, playing again and again the scenario in the same location feels a bit lazy and a bit disappointing. In this cycle, for the first time, authors realized that they can introduce some more mechanics and components, not only new cards. Cycle comes with 3 major novelties. Tokens of Blessing and Curse added to the back, tokens of Flood that covers locations and can hurt investigators, and tokens of Keys. There's a lot of new elements exploited very well through the whole cycle. For us, the weakest point of this cycle is probably the story. Somehow it's not very memorable and not that engaging. Maybe because of the constantly changing perspective in the narrative part of the game. Sometimes the story refers to the present time, sometimes to the past. In the end, it's really hard for us to even recall how we ended this adventure. What is also quite disappointing is the last scenario, which was surprisingly easy and short. This cycle tears us apart a little bit. In terms of introduced motifs from Lovecraft myths, we love it. In terms of mechanics and how this plot was put together, not so much. To go through the whole plot and play this cycle properly, players need to create 2 teams of investigators. Scenarios here are played using 2 teams, alternating each scenario, and we are not always fans of this solution. Cycle scenarios are split evenly between 2 groups, so it's 4 scenarios per team. It's definitely not enough to feel the real development of your investigators, both in case of story and skills, as well as build an emotional connection with them. Additionally, the scenario is written rather messy, so I remember that sometimes we were confused about who is who and to whom they are referring. And finally, we love Dreamlands and all iconic locations and motifs that they introduced in this cycle. But unfortunately, locations felt random and not cohesive. The plot, the locations, links between locations, all of that gives a feeling of being put together by force just to make it more Lovecraftian. Another cycle that is very high in our ranking thanks to the atmosphere and story. This time all events are placed in Arkham, where investigators are going to encounter witches, rituals, magic, ghosts and so on. We love the claustrophobic atmosphere of the cycle and spectacular artworks. Each scenario comes with mind-blowing art of tarot card with prophecy delivered by some old crazy witch. And of course, witches are not the only thing investigators are going to face here. Members of the Silver Lodge are joining the plot quite fast. The Circle UNDONE is the only cycle where the story starts with the perspective of NPC. And let's just say the beginning is only the tip of an iceberg. This one is the essence of Lovecraftian insanity. It all begins with the plane shown in Arkham, the king in yellow, and the rest is pure madness. The atmosphere here is thick and heavy with mysterious men in the polished mask following investigators all the time. Players will encounter wide-awake nightmares, will visit the mental hospital, survive the murderous massacre, and even travel to Paris where they venture in the catacombs. If you read The Repair of the Reputations by Robert Chambers, the path to Carcosa is like the purest manifestation of this amazing novel. As it's the second cycle in the releasing order, we do not get here any innovative, spectacular new mechanics changing everything. The authors were still learning, but that is not a con. The story here is everything. And our number one. The Forgotten Age set us investigators as explorers of the Amazonian jungle, where we can find ancient temples, monsters and guardians of forgotten knowledge. When the cycle was published, it was extremely difficult, especially for non-hardcore Arkham Horror players. Some scenarios felt even unbeatable. The story is a very strong element of this cycle and it's cohesive and very well put together. As this is one of the first cycles in the release order, authors still were experimenting and discovering what they can do with this mind-blowing game. The Forgotten Age was the first to introduce new mechanics not seen before, completely changing the way how scenarios are played. In general, we fell in love with the Forgotten Age thanks to the amazing story, and it gave us the feeling of Indiana Jones adventures with a very global and grand scope spiced up with Lovecraftian lore.